proper story is supposed to start at the beginning. Ain't so simple with this one.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Video Game Villains. Today we're going to be looking at Zulf from Supergiant Games' original masterpiece, Bastion. So join us as we explore this unique narrative experience and delve into what caused him to crack in the game's ruined world.
Zulf had difficulty telling me his story. Haven't heard it. I could understand why.
Zulf was born in the Tazzle terminals to a simple Ura couple, but his parents passed away when he was young. In order to get by, he had to resort to stealing food from a Ceylondian missionary. One day, the missionary catches Zulf, but in a surprising turn of events, he decides to take Zulf in and raises him as his own son. Despite the tensions between the two nations, the missionary preached peace between Ceylondia and the Ura, a practice that Zulf would keep up even after the missionary had passed away. Zulf's message would reach many of the Ura, but it wasn't enough for Zulf to just preach to them, and so he left for the city to demonstrate to the Ceylondians that the Ura had changed. Zulf was surprisingly well received in Ceylondia. He made friends with the city folk, was treated with dignity by the marshals, and drew the attention of a Ceylondian girl. She showed him all her favorite secrets of the city, and their favorite place to spend time together was the Hanging Gardens.
Folks used to go here to relax from their relaxing.
One day in the Hanging Gardens, Zulf proposed to her in a proper Ceylondian style. She said yes, and then he gathered all of his friends and proceeded to spend the rest of the night celebrating.
He celebrated with his friends long into the night. Joy and revelry like he'd never seen. Too bad he couldn't remember it all. He woke up alone underground inside the Ura Ceylondian War Memorial, built like an Ura den. But something was wrong. They met on the worst day of Zulf's life. There in the Hanging Gardens, he aimed to throw it all away.
While Zulf was sleeping off the previous night's celebrations, an event so tragic, known as the Calamity, would occur and end virtually all life as he knew it. When he left the War Memorial the next morning, he saw what could only be described as a nightmare. Everybody he saw was frozen and disintegrated into ash upon contact. He went home in search of his fiancée, who he found in bed, but she was unfortunately also a victim of the Calamity, and joined the ashes in the sky when he reached out to her.
And so Zulf returned to where he proposed in the Hanging Gardens, and there he stood, as if the gods would answer him.
And it was here where the kid and Zulf first met. After navigating through the Hanging Gardens and seeing the many victims of the Calamity, on his way out after recovering the core, the kid sees Zulf, lamenting everything, and manages to muster the words to say one thing.
We have to go. Please.
The pair of them return to the Bastion, where Zulf is simply relieved to see some living faces. Zulf remains in the Bastion with Rux and the kid, and helps them out in its construction. Shortly after, the kid rescues another Ura who had managed to survive the Calamity, a girl by the name of Zia. Zulf was pleasantly surprised to see that another Ura had survived, but Zia wasn't the only thing that was brought back from Prosper Bluff. She had brought with her her father's journal.
If only I'd known half the secrets of the Calamity were tucked away in that book, I'd have worked to translate it right away. A scientific journal written in Zulf's native tongue. He learned so much from it. Too much.
While the kid searches for the final core to repair the Bastion, Zulf reads Zia's father's journal and realizes that the Calamity was intended to be a weapon used by the Ceylondians versus the Ura. With this new knowledge, Zulf grows angry and trashes the Bastion. He curses the city, the Bastion, and Rux, and says that he is leaving. He smashes up the monument, which had been holding all of the cores that the kid had been retrieving, until Rux stops him. The kid returns to the Bastion to witness the end of the confrontation.
See, Zulf and I were just wrapping up a heated discussion. Zulf can barely muster the words. The Calamity failed, he says, but I will not.
The damage done to the Bastion was enough that simply restoring the cores wouldn't be enough to get it up and running. The kid would now have to search for some shards as well to bring it up to its full strength. While hunting down one of the shards in Point Mamain, the kid encounters an Ura who knocks him out and leaves a note for Zia that was passed on from Zulf.
The note says it plain. Zia, go east to learn the truth about the Calamity and our people. I'll be waiting. Sincerely, Zulf.
If the kid shows this letter to Rux, he wonders how many Ura remain and what Zulf told them. After collecting a few more of the shards, part of this pondering is answered when the Bastion comes under attack by some Ura who had been shown the way by Zulf. Zia is seemingly abducted by these Ura, although we later find out that she left willingly to see the truth for herself. The final confrontation with Zulf happens when the kid heads over to the Tazzle terminals, deep in the heart of the Ura, to retrieve the last shard. The kid discovers Zulf on the ground, being attacked by some other Ura, presumably for leaving a trail for the kid to follow him. The Ura flee as the kid arrives, and he is presented with two options: abandoning Zulf where he lays, or abandoning his weapon and carrying Zulf out. If Zulf is abandoned, he presumably remains where he lays, and either dies of his injuries or some Ura return to finish him off. But if the kid drops his weapon and rescues Zulf, the remaining Ura attack them initially, but stop and observe the pair as they make their way to the Skyway to return to the Bastion for a final decision. I want to focus mainly on two things in this section: the Calamity and the ending. As hinted by the name, and explicitly told to us in the first few seconds of the game, we can tell that the Calamity was a catastrophic event that led to a significant loss of life and destruction of the Ceylondian Empire, but the actual specifics of it are left a mystery for us. One thing that we do know about it though, and the reason I'm choosing to focus on it here, is the effect that it had on Zulf. When he reads the journal that Zia had on her, his mindset immediately changes. Gone is the Zulf that his mentor had raised, and the preachings of peace between the Ura and Ceylondia are forgotten and taken over by a hatred. A hatred for the Ceylondians, a hatred for the Bastion, a hatred for Rux and the kid. The player gets a bit of foreshadowing when they show the journal to Rux before moving on, as the narrator version of Rux mentions that it contained information regarding the Calamity, and says, if only he knew that earlier, implying that maybe things could have been different. So Zulf read it, learned about the Calamity, and then turned on everyone. So what did he learn? At the heart of the Calamity was a simple idea. We never wanted to go to war again, wanted to rule it out. The Calamity was intended to be used as a weapon by Ceylondia to wipe out the Ura, but the plan had backfired. The project was devised by a group called the Mansers, who were some of the most brilliant minds in the city, as well as an Ura named Ven. The Calamity was supposed to instantly seal off all of the Ura tunnels, which would have killed them, but Ven was uncomfortable being the mastermind behind this. He was told that it was only ever to be used as a last resort, but this still didn't bode well with Ven, who sabotaged the project, causing it to blow up in their faces. And so now we can look back at Zulf, and his betrayal makes a lot more sense. The Ceylandian leaders had wanted to wipe out his people, and the Bastion was headed by 2 Ceylandians. Additionally, regardless of how the Calamity played out, Zulf was doomed to get burned by the outcome. While the original intention of wiping out his people had never happened, he had lived in the city for some time, made friends, and even fallen in love with a Ceylandian, and had lost his new way of life instead. So it should now be clear why Zulf was so upset upon reading Ven's journal. From his perspective, it wasn't him betraying the Bastion, it was Ceylandia and Ven who had already betrayed him, and he returns to the Ura to rally them to take revenge upon the remaining Ceylandians. As for the endings, there are 3 possible results for Zulf. As I mentioned earlier, choosing to abandon him in the Tazzle terminals is presumably leaving him for dead, but if you choose to put down the battering ram and rescue Zulf, then he can take part in whichever ending you choose. Rux reveals that the Bastion has 2 features: its intended purpose of reverting the world to a state back before the Calamity in hopes that history wouldn't repeat itself, or evacuating, detonating the cores and taking off in hopes of finding a new land. In the credits of the Restoration ending, we get a shot of Zulf smiling and holding on to a woman, who we can assume is his fiancée from before the Calamity took her away. The state of the world is unknown with regards to the Calamity repeating itself, but for a while at least, we're able to reunite Zulf with his fiancée and return that happiness to him. And in the evacuation ending, obviously he doesn't get to see his fiancée again, but beyond that, we don't really get much of a view into what happens with Zulf. We do get one shot of him working in the Bastion's kitchen alongside a squirt, but nothing that shows how he really feels about how the events turned out. And finally, the endings do show a nice contrast between Zulf and Zia, 2 Ura that we meet throughout the game.
Zulf tried to talk me into joining him. I tried to talk him out of it. I guess we both failed.
Both are Ura, who are obviously the intended victims of the Calamity, but both have vastly differing views on when they were enjoying life. Zulf obviously yearns to return to the time when his fiancée and other friends were around, but Zia doesn't seem to have enjoyed her time before the Calamity quite as much.
Any moment I'd want to live again happened after the Calamity, not before.
In the evacuation ending, Zia looks excited up on the deck of the Bastion, looking forward to whatever journeys await her. But in the Restoration ending, we see her playing her harp on some steps, with a very solemn expression on her face.
Eyes open wide. Kid's probably dealt with Zulf by now. He reminds me of myself when I was his age. I ever tell you about those days?